I'm Ellen Datlow, and I'm a short story editor of science fiction, fantasy, and horror. I mostly edit anthologies, and I work for Tor.com and Nightfire, acquiring short stories up to novellas. Several of the people here have been, well, all of them have been published by me in one way or another. A few of them are in the forthcoming and for sale Christmas and Other Horrors, which is my most recent horror anthology, which is all original tales about solstice. So, anyway, but I would like to have everyone introduce themselves before we start. Stephen?
Stephen Graham Jones. I am Stephen Graham Jones. I write a lot of horror books and love to read horror, and that's what I do.
I just want to go Paul Tremblay now. Hi, I'm Paul. Yeah, like Stephen, I've written novels and short stories, and I got my start writing short stories. I feel like that's a confession. I've been writing short stories for a long time.
Don't say any more, because you're going to screw up my questions.
I feel like I'm in some kind of support group right now for some reason. Hi, Cassandra Khaw. By day, I work in video games. By night, I write books and a lot of short stories.
You know, all their introductions are so brief, and I was ready to go down the list of like all the awards I've been nominated for and haven't won.
Go.
But no. But my name is Bracken MacLeod. You can see up there. I've got a novel. My newest novel is Closing Costs. I also have 2 collections of short stories, one of which is 13 Views of the Suicide Woods. I kind of cut my teeth on short stories before becoming a novelist.
Okay. My first question for you all is, what do you like? You all write short fiction and novels, but most people realize that novels are what make money for you if you're a writer, and short stories make a pittance comparatively. So, what do you like about writing short stories? And I'm going to start with Bracken.
Oh, what do I like about
Versus
writing?
novels. Yeah.
Versus novels. I mean, it's a hard question because in my opinion, short stories are a lot harder to write than novels because they have to be so succinct. But I think that's what I like best about them, is that they're direct to the point. You have an idea and you execute it, and it's sort of forceful and swift. And you can't really, I mean, you can do those things in scenes in novels, but you don't really get to express yourself the same way. Some stories are just short, and if you stretch them out to a novel, they wouldn't work. So yeah, what I like best about short stories is their sort of propulsiveness.
Cassandra. Sorry, we're going in order.
Okay, I was just checking. Unfortunate. Damn it. I think what I like best about them is the opportunity to experiment. If you look at most forms of media, whether people are academics in a field or not, you have certain expectations. You know a book should look a certain way. You know a movie should look a certain way. You understand the rhythms intrinsically. But with short stories, there is an opportunity to mess with tone, with first-person tenses, third-person tenses. You can do a lot that you can't do anywhere else. And I think I often use my short stories almost as testing grounds for bigger ideas. And with longer pieces, there's a lot of work that goes into layering themes and ideas and plots, where short stories allow for intensity. You have a split second there to show people exactly what you want. You can burn an image into their mind and leave. If you try doing that with a longer piece of fiction, people get tired. But short stories allow for that.
Great answers, both. I love Cass's description of, like, as a writer, being able to feel more free to experiment and do weird stuff. I don't know, as a reader, like, my favorite short stories kind of feel like, even though they're not like this moment in time, as you know, Bracken said, this one scene, but I love the idea of just being this really intense focus on a moment, and somehow that moment feels expansive. To me, that's like the magic and the trick of a really good short story.
What was the question again? It's been a long time.
Why do you like writing?
Oh, why do I like writing short fiction? What my favorite thing about writing short fiction is that it takes an afternoon, and if the story fails, I just throw it away, you know?
Oh, wow.
If I write a novel, that might take 4 weeks, 5 weeks, and at the end of it, at the end of it, if it doesn't work, then I like try to make it work, and that takes longer. But short stories, just throw it away if it doesn't work, and I love that.
That's funny because it takes me like 2 weeks to a month to write a short story and 6 to 9 months to write a novel. So none of it feels disposable. But yeah, you're right. If the short story doesn't work, you don't feel like you just threw a year away.
Right. I mean, I've worked with writers who, years ago, I tried to get Joan Vinge to write short stories for me. She was a science fiction writer. She is still alive, but she was writing really great short stories. And I was just starting at Omni, and I got there just when she stopped writing short stories, and I was ready to even commission her, which you don't do very often, which means you have to pay a kill fee if you don't take it. And I said, please write a short story. And she said, I can't. It takes as long for me to write a short story as it does a novel.
There's a Stephen King quote, I think, which is exactly that. Somebody approached him about a short story,
Yeah.
and he's like, I don't have time to write you a short story. Would you take
But he
a novel?
writes them sometimes. So, I mean, I guess it depends also whether you're a natural short story writer or a natural novel writer. And you can't, I mean, when writers ask me, I mean, I was discussing this with a writer who was very interested in writing short stories, but she said, I can't. I do them when I'm pressured, and I'm forced to do it. But I don't really feel comfortable. And I said, then don't feel you have to. You don't have to write, you have to write novels to make a living, but you do not have to write short stories. And I hate saying this because I'm a short story editor. But if you can't do it, don't force yourself. The good thing is that you can experiment and you can play with the idea. And the thing is, to continue writing short stories, I think you need to have a passion for it. Otherwise, you probably won't feel it worth it, the time.
Yeah, John Barth, he says that the difference in short story writers and novelists, it's a difference in sprinters and marathon runners. And it's really cruel to make a sprinter run a marathon. Some people just are built for short stories. And I wish the world was such that the market would support a writer for only writing stories. Like, we have, George Saunders, he probably does it, Is there maybe Lydia Davis?
Kelly Link.
Yeah, Kelly Link, but she's been pressured into writing. I'm not,
Right.
She didn't get pressured. I think she
Yes,
did.
she did get pressured.
Yeah. I was trying to be all secret, man.
Yeah, no, it's a problem. And as an editor, I'm not a novel editor, as you know, as we talked about. I'm a short story, and novellas are the in-between, and they can be long. They can be short novellas, which are like 20,000 words, or long novellas, which can be 40,000 or more, even though it's not really officially a novella. And I can't work with with novels. It's a different structure. For me, even working with the writer, it's too many strands, I think. I mean, I probably could become a decent novel editor, but it would take my training and my brain. It's just not something I work with.
It's also just not your passion. I think you just enjoy the shorter
That's true.
forms.
Yeah. And it may not be my passion because I can't do it. I don't know. But I also have this feeling about horror fiction. I do think that short story and novella are more perfect forms for supernatural horror. I've said this before, but I think it's really, really difficult to sustain a supernatural idea for readers who don't believe in the supernatural for an entire novel. It's very hard to sustain that suspension of disbelief.
Well, I mean, I'll be the contrarian and push back against that a little bit. I mean, because you hear that as almost like an old saw, and I think like a lot of old saws, I don't know if they're totally true. I mean, is it any more difficult to hold the suspension for disbelief for 25 pages? I mean, if something happens in a short story that doesn't ring as true, I think it's just going to drop you out immediately. So I don't know. I just don't know if the novella is the perfect form of horror. I think horror can be anything, can do anything. Sorry. With all respect.
It's okay. It's okay. Cassandra?
I'm going to also get myself into trouble, I guess. I think it's also cultural, depending on where you are. Certain demographics might bounce off horror books because they were raised to be secular. But in Asia, there is just an abundance of horror fiction, horror media, and no one thinks twice about it. Because even if people grow out of any religious or spiritual beliefs, at a core, they were raised with those mythos. So I think it depends.
Well, I love horror fiction, whether it's secular or not. But on the other hand, I may not be able to sustain that disbelief, as I said, for the whole novel. Unless it's, I just think, well.
I experienced that as the creator of the novel, being a secular person who doesn't have who doesn't have a religious life, right? It's hard for me to sustain a supernatural element over the course of 300 pages. I can do it in a short story because I can get in that headspace for, unlike Stephen, in a day, for a couple of weeks. But maintaining that over a long period of time, I start to get weary, and I'm like, oh, is this really scaring me? I'm not sure it is, because it doesn't live in me.
Right. Well, not all supernatural horror fiction is religious-based anyway.
I know. I use that as
I mean, I was just saying
shorthand.
that, yeah. Stephen, did you want to say something?
Oh, I was just gonna say that, but horror novels versus horror stories, in my own stuff anyways, and I think I see this everywhere else, a horror story can end with everybody, a short story can end with everybody dead on the floor a lot better than a horror novel can, I think. Because after you've invested, 3 days of your mind and heart space reading a book, you want that investment to pay out, You want a little redemption at the end. And novels, I think novels have a lot of pressure to offer that redemption. Short stories are not under that pressure. Short stories can just blow people up left and right, and it's pretty fun.
Yeah, I guess you're not as invested in the characters, perhaps. Or you are. All right, this is going to be a completely different subject, kind of. Talking about writing to theme, I assume all of you have written to theme occasionally. Whoever wants to jump in first, how do you feel about that? How do you do that? What themes? I mean, I assume that sometimes you just want to work with the editor, or you just want the money, the big money for. But how do you deal with writing to theme? Anyone? Paul.
I'll jump in really quickly. So, I mean, I've been very fortunate to be sort of like on a schedule where it's like almost like a novel a year, maybe like 2 books every 3 years. So I feel like I'm in novel mode most of the time. So nowadays, a chance to write a short story feels like, ooh, I get to take a little bit of a break. And I always find like when I take a few weeks off, not an afternoon, to write a short story, when I come back to the novel, I feel like I have a fresh set of eyes. But so I get excited for that. So the theme part of it is, it's like a neat little challenge. For your anthology, Black Feathers, it doesn't usually work this way, but it was kind of fun. She wrote a bird anthology, or not wrote, she edited a bird anthology. She's like, okay, what am I going to write about? So I took out a notebook and I wrote something about birds. And that ended up being the title of the short story. And I drew little bird heads. I didn't know what to do. But it was just fun, how those two things just grew into this weird story that I wasn't anticipating writing. So to me, that themes are hard, but it can be fun because this was something I wasn't probably going to write otherwise without the push from you or the push from the prompt or the theme.
Yeah, like working with Ellen, you'll have an anthology with a theme and you'll hit us up for it, and it'll be like vampire kittens in space, And
Never that specific.
Yeah, and I have to then figure out how to get a big ball of yarn into orbit and all this stuff. And but the thing about Ellen is she'll say, "Do you want to do this?" And I'll say, "Sure." And then a day later, she'll send a list of all the things you can't do, and that's every one of my ideas, So it's fun though because I have to go further afield to figure stuff out. For that bird thing, I had to write 2 stories for that. The first one I wrote was just way too weird, and so
that was Birdfather or something.
yeah, Birdfather was the second one I wrote for that.
No,
yeah.
what was the original?
The first one, I don't remember what it's called, but it's a weird story. It was too weird for me. I'm like, this is in my head. I don't know this. But what I love about theme assignments is I go into them thinking, so I can write about vampire kittens. I can make that up for whatever pennies a word. But then I always accidentally emotionally engage with it, and I'm like, oh, I'm telling another father-son story. This actually matters to me,
I was going to jump in and say partially my love for theme is possibly because I have a lot of corporate training. When you work in video games, you don't really get a decision on what you write. People tell you this is the design, this is the world, work. I'm like, cool, I need a paycheck. But it's also the challenge of it that I love. When Things Get Dark, that was probably the hardest story I've ever written. I'm really used to gore. I'm really used to very explicit horror. And being told to do a Shirley Jackson thing after the first few days of going, oh, yes, of course. It was just me sitting there going, crap, the hell did I have to get myself into? But if you live a life where you take the easiest possible route, the years and the moments of it just vanish. Challenging yourself is a way to keep yourself engaged. It's a way to keep yourself mentally young. It's true of physical exercise as well. If you're constantly doing new things, it's good for you. And I like the exertion just for that reason.
I'm 50-50 on themed anthologies because sometimes, I think it's just me, sometimes I really connect with the theme, like Vampire Kittens in Space would be fun because it's so out there, but there are other times where I self-select and I'm like, I'm not going to write for that anthology because it's, Christoph Paul's here, it's pizza horror and I just don't have an idea, right? But the best part of the pizza horror anthology is, well, the best part of that was, what happens with an open call themed anthology is that, you have 20 slots or 18 slots and you'll get like 1,500 stories. And so what happens for the next year or two is that all of the anthology calls that go out say, well, it's an unthemed anthology, but we're not accepting anything with, violence against children, animals, mermaids, and no pizzas. And you go, what? What happened in the industry that's all, there's a glut of pizza stories?
That's why I don't have open markets. I mean, most of my original anthologies are solicited stories. And part of the reason is I don't have time to read 1,200 stories. And the other part is I don't want to see 1,200 or 10, maybe 1,100, or whatever, stories on the same theme running around for the next 3 years, because I'm also reading for the year's best.
You did that with Fearful Symmetries. That was a huge...
Well, that was non-theme.
But that was open, yeah.
Yeah, well, it was partly open, yeah. The reason I do theme anthologies is because non-theme anthologies don't sell. I mean, they sometimes sell, but not like theme ones. And everyone says, I really want to read a non-theme anthology. And then it's out there. Yeah. And compared to the theme anthologies, they don't sell.
I have a question for you. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I had a question for you when you're done.
Okay, keep that thought. Now you lost mine, but... So, I mean, I've done a few non-theme anthologies. Inferno was a non-theme horror anthology. Salon Fantastique was a fantasy non-theme anthology I did with Terry Windling. The Delray book of science fiction, fantasy, and horror, which really bombed, which was beautifully produced, and that didn't sell. And Fearful Symmetries, which was done, I funded it with a Kickstarter, and it done okay. I mean, now it's as an ebook. But my best-selling anthologies are the themed ones. And the thing is, when I do a theme, I try to create themes that are broad enough to push the writers against the theme. And what were you going to ask?
I was always curious, do you, you have a stable of writers, you have people you've worked with, us other folks out there. Do you select who you ask based on their previous experiences? Or do you just send a mass email out?
I don't do a mass email, but if I have a particular theme, I will try to think of the writers who I think can write to it. But then there's serendipity. When I was doing my Poe anthology, I was talking to Delia Sherman, who's the last person I would think would do a Poe story, because she's fantasy. And she wrote a very good Poe story. She said, I'd like to do that. And so that was kind of serendipity and shocking. So, I mean, and then of course, all my writers want to be in every anthology. And it's like, it doesn't work that way. I can't. I'd love to fit all 500 of you, but I can't do that. So I do try to pick and choose, and sometimes I'll try to, I don't blindly send out to everybody I work with, but I try to figure out who would be right. And there are people who say no, and either they don't have an idea or they don't have the time. I mean, this is not exactly the same subject, but I'll always ask maybe a third more people than I need for an anthology, because a third drop out for one reason or another. So I try to never commit. I have only one publisher who makes me say who's going to be in the book, and we made it so that I can have 3 out of 6 of these people, and then anyone else I want. And I know I can get 3 of those 6 people, so it's not an issue. But it's like, I can't guarantee these, and they may drop dead. You can't guarantee someone's going to write a story or write a good story.
I wasn't expecting that.
Or an appropriate story. Well, it's true, and
And I was going to say, you always ask, if you need a really long story that's going to be turned in late at the end, you always ask John Langan for that.
Exactly. Always long and always late. Although his story for when things get dark was so short, I was shocked.
It's so good.
It's like, I don't understand. Wait a minute, you wrote a really short, 3,000 words, 2,000 words.
Yeah, it was really short.
Just one thing. I asked Joyce Carol Oates for some of my anthologies, and she's great. If she has the idea, she will write it immediately, whether I have the book sale or not, which is not a good thing, because that happened once and I had to give her story back. I said, I haven't sold the anthology, you have to just resell it. And if she doesn't have an idea, she just won't get back to me. You know, it's like silence. It's like, did you get my email? You know, it's like, are you sure you don't want to do this thing? Silence. It's like, but otherwise she'll do it like immediately.
You were talking about a third of the people dropping out. And I remember about 9 years ago, I was in Santa Fe doing events, and you emailed me or called me or something.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, and you said, "Can you get me a story by tomorrow?" And I had
I probably gave him more than
maybe the
I probably
weekend.
gave you 3 days.
Yeah, you probably gave me 3 days, and my first thought was, I wonder if somebody's late, you know? And
Yeah, I don't remember what happened.
yeah, I don't have any
Must
idea.
have-
But I looked at my schedule, and I had 3 hours between things, so I went to my room and jammed out a story, and it turned out all right. It was fun.
That was Tenderizer, right?
No, that was the darkest part.
Well, the Tenderizer was another one.
Yeah, yeah.
That was, I think, the only original and a reprint anthology.
It was, yeah.
Yeah, and that was one that I misinterpreted the ending, that I thought something more disgusting and weird happened, but it didn't, and I was disappointed when it told me. All right.
Please don't ever do that to me. I'm just going to die if you ever send me that email.
Sorry?
Like, if you ever send me an email going, I need a story tomorrow, I will pass out.
Okay, all right. Can you do it?
Yes, but I will still be on the floor doing it.
Usually I give people a little more lead time than that. You know, and then I nag them for the next 6 months. You know, how's it coming?
She does.
Do we have any more things to say among ourselves about short stories?
No,
If we open
it's
it-
good that you send those emails. It's good that editors send those nudges, because I always forget that I've said yes to a thing. And then when you send the nudge and you say, your story's due Thursday, and it's Tuesday, I'm like, I've got it, you know?
Yeah, sure. Sure.
No, I'm
And I
wondering-
mean, the thing is, as I get stories in, what I need changes. You know, that's why we say get your stories in early, because it's wide open. As it gets later, I have too many stories like that. Don't write that kind of story anymore. So, Bracken, you were going to say something.
Oh, no, well, yeah, I was, I can't remember. I remember now because I couldn't remember, which is I have the same problem that Stephen does, is I'll say yes to something and my mind is a sieve and it just falls right through the holes and I forget. So yeah, the nudges are nice. And it's just kind of funny that I forgot I was going to say that just now.
Okay. Nudges are usually appreciated, although I once did an anthology. This is an anthology that the most I ever got paid for an anthology. It actually went to auction, which was shocking. And it sold 27,000 books in hardcover, which to me is brilliant. To the publisher, it sunk, all right? But the point of it was I had to get a particular writer who had committed to writing a story for me. And as with everybody, I mean, I went through the agent. The writer was the in-house editor's author and my agent's author. So it's like, okay, and this person wrote like 5 books a year. I'm not saying who, it doesn't matter. Maybe I'll badmouth them later. But anyway, so as always, I nudged, how's the story coming? And I get an email from my agent saying, don't bother her, she's really freaked out. Don't do that, she'll do the story. Well, as time went on, she did not do the story. She basically screwed over her agent because she dumped the agent. She screwed over the in-house editor and me, and I had to replace her one story with 3 other stories, which I did get by big names. But it's like,
I'll buy you a drink
don't
later so
trust
you tell me
big
who that
names.
is.
What? What?
I'll buy you a drink later so you can tell me who that is.
Okay, all right. You probably don't even know the person. They're not in our field, kind of. They are and not, whatever. Okay, should we leave this open to questions? Sorry, anyone have questions? Oh, okay. Wait, I can't see. Did someone raise their hand?
Oh, no, they're going to the microphone there.
Did they have to get up there? Oh, they have
Oh,
to
wow,
go up
there's a
there?
lot of
I'm gonna have
questions.
to leave. Oh my
I
God.
don't know how it works. Anyway, yes, ask your question, please.
This is a total cornball question, but I feel like I'm really curious. If you had to do a choice cut, not your best, but maybe your personal favorite short story, where it is, and if this was the gateway into reading more of your stuff, where would you take us first with your choice short story?
We're having the writers, yes? Yes. Go for it, anyone.
I'll go first because I have an answer, weirdly. So I wrote this short story called It's Against the Law to Feed the Ducks. Yeah, thank you. That's funny. Yeah, that's a funny title. But it's a really depressing story. I mean, I wrote it, geez, a long time ago. It was like probably the mid-2000s. But like writing that short story for the first time, I felt like, not that I know what I'm doing, but like I felt like, oh, this is what I was aiming for, like this sort of feel. And it might have been like the first time I did like this really overtly ambiguous thing. So I kind of felt like that story really excited me, and it primed the pump for, you know, for a lot of things that came after it. Yeah, there you go.
I wrote a story, it's one of my favorite stories and probably the best title I'll ever come up with in my life, called Pigs Don't Squeal in Tiger Town.
Oh, yeah.
And I actually, it's one of my favorites because it's based on a situation I lived through, lived adjacent to, I would say, which was, does everybody know what a liger is?
Yes.
It's a crossbreed of a lion and a tiger. It's like the mule of the big cat world. And this guy outside of this town I was living in had a liger zoo that was all made with like chicken wire and pallets. And the ligers got out. And so they're roaming the countryside, all this farmland, and the local biker gang decided that it was safari season. And so the bikers all got their guns and started going out into farmland trying to catch the ligers. And it was near a resort town at a little hot springs. And it was absolutely insane. I love that story. It was so much fun to write.
I guess I don't know if it's a good place to start or a place to run from, but I have a story called Love is a Cavity I Can't Stop Touching, which when I wrote it, I thought, that's
Great
different.
title.
That's weird. And
Great titles, all of these.
yeah, and it was really fun. And it's about two kids, you know, they're 14, 15, they're in love like you are when you're 14 and 15, and they go out in the woods and use a knife and a spoon and a lighter, and they like carve a piece out of each other's legs and eat, like that's love, you know, to eat each other. And I like that. It was fun to do.
Can I say briefly, I think that you read that story. We were in Los Angeles. It was a reading. It was me, Stephen, and the genius Sarah Gran. And Sarah just about passed out. I'm not exaggerating. She like had to stop listening and was like laying in a stranger's lap because of his description of the sharing of the thigh meat, essentially. Yeah.
Surprisingly, the short story I love most, the one I'm proudest of, is one that's completely absent of any horror, any gore, anyone dying, which if you've ever read my work is a very unusual thing. It's called A Priest of Vast and Distant Places. So for about 10 years of my life, I was essentially nomadic because I worked as a journalist, and I had it broken down so that people would send me to assignments 7 hours away, and then 7 hours away again where I could visit my family, and it just kept going for about 10 years. I just never stopped. And in that book, you have a character who is essentially a priest to the plains and just travels everywhere, speaking to the plains, speaking to the environment. And it explored a lot of my own loneliness, but also the love that I had for the liminal spaces that exist when you travel. If you travel long enough, that nothingness becomes a home in a really weird way. And yeah, that's my favorite one.
Thank you, Clay.
Another question?
Yes, there are a lot of online magazines where you can publish short stories as well as contests. Do you have any advice about either of the two for unpublished authors who are trying to get their work out there?
Just submit them when they're open. I know oh my God. Nightmare. Oh my
Nightmare
God, my
magazine,
brain's
yeah.
gone. You know, Nightmare is a good venue. I mean, they're not open all the time, but when they're open, you could submit there. The Dark, to me, The Dark publishes mostly dark fantasy, but still you can print there. Unfortunately, Black Static has just done its last issue. Black Static was a fabulous magazine out of England. Sister magazine to Interzone, and published and edited by Andy Cox, and it was doing fabulous, regularly publishing great horror fiction. I usually would take at least one story from their run, but as I said, they just published their last issue. There are new magazines, and I assume they're taking submissions from anybody, I don't know, but you can check. Phantasmagoria is a new one, The Deadlands. There's some that are supernatural tales. I don't know, some of them I don't know if they pay or how much they pay. Supernatural tales may not pay much or anything. Can you think of more?
I mean, I can't think of more titles, but on the subject of pay, you know, my feeling is get paid, even if it's just a token payment,
Yeah.
right? Don't give it away, and don't pay to be
Yes.
read.
Definitely, they're not
Reading
paid to
fees are not
publish.
your friends. So yeah, if they're saying like $10 to submit to us,
No.
you know, save that money and make $10 selling a poem to a little indie magazine.
I want to jump in and say, if you're looking for new venues to go, I would recommend the Submissions Grinder and Duotrope. With these two services, I think Duotrope, you can pay for a subscription as well. You'll be able to see which venues publish what kind of fiction, their timeline, their turnaround time, if they have simultaneous submission policies, how much they pay. And it's easier to go that way because you can kind of do that thing where lots of short story writers do, where you start up an Excel sheet and then you can track what's going on. And I think that's the best two places to start if everything else seems overwhelming.
Yeah, Duotrope is a great tool.
Yeah, I would only add, I mean, I second wholeheartedly, like, get paid. Like, when I first started, everything, it was $10 or $25, but like, I made sure I got something because I wasn't just going to give it away. It was too hard, especially at the beginning.
No, your labor is worth something.
The other thing I would add is don't reject yourself. Like, try the highest markets. Submit to Tor.com. Ellen, read this story. Like, let the markets
I yell at you.
decide.
Yeah,
I feel like
always
somebody-
start from the highest paying to the lowest.
Yeah. Yeah.
And,
they're open.
and if you get an acceptance, if you can at all manage it, don't sign a exclusivity clause for longer than 12 months, I would say. 6 months is ideal, but not longer than 12
For a
months.
magazine, 6 or 12, but I mean, sometimes for anthologies, it's occasionally 18 now. But there's always an exception for year's best, and you can usually get an exception or a special whatever to do it in your own collection.
Yeah,
But on the other hand, I won't, if I have a story, I don't want a writer to publish a collection within 6 months of my anthology, a collection with that story.
Before or after?
Sorry?
Before or after?
After.
After.
Well, before, definitely not.
Before, definitely not.
Yeah, before, okay, and this is another thing. I co-run the KGB readings. Just to be aware, if you do a reading someplace and it's a podcast, that's considered publication. So just so you know, if you care about first publication, which is usually important mostly for awards, but also for payment. If you are reading something for a podcast, if you are publishing a Patreon that has a lot of people getting it, you may have trouble. You have to first of all, you have to make the market aware that this has been published, because it has been.
I just want to jump in. This doesn't completely answer your question. I'm not sure it answers your question at all. But on a related topic, just gather up those rejections. Early on, it feels very easy to take it personally. If an editor goes, hey, I don't like this, it starts accumulating in their heart. Ultimately, every editor is choosing stories based on their own aesthetic, what they need, what they think is appropriate for the venue. And I struggled with that a lot for a while until I sent a story into a professional magazine, and the editor got back to me with like a 6-page paragraph personalized rejection. It was great. And he was like, I do not like this particular element. If you change it, I think it is something that appeals to me. And I remember very distinctly going, no, this is necessary for the story. So I took it back and I sent it to another pro magazine. It sold within 20 minutes. So.
Yeah, that language in rejections is really important, because somebody will send you a rejection that says, we're sorry, this isn't right for us. And that's not personal. That's dependent upon the publication or the editor or whatever. Somebody sends you a rejection that says, sorry, this isn't good for us, but we'd love to see something else.
They mean
That's a ray of sunshine through the clouds, because
And
that's an invitation to send.
Yeah, and also sometimes, I might suggest another mark. If I like a story enough but don't think it works for me, I might suggest another market.
Yeah. So
I like it enough to do that.
Don't take it personally unless they, unless they're completely unprofessional. They're like, this is a terrible story, which you'll never get. But they'll say, this isn't right for us. That's not you. That's them. And if they say, we look forward to seeing more from you, that's positive. That means they liked your story, just didn't work for them at that moment.
Or take it all personally and keep a little shrine in your closet with names.
Next question?
Yeah, especially writing short stories. How much do you, at the beginning, purposely challenge yourself to do something different than you've ever done before? Go like, okay, I'm going to do second person this time, or what may?
Don't do second person. No, don't do second person
Ice cream.
feature. No, you can't. If it works, it works.
Every short story, every time I write a short story, I try to challenge myself and do something different than I have done before. Just because, as Cass said, it's sort of a perfect opportunity to explore spaces that you don't. And with my novels, especially with my agent, you know, he wants a particular thing, and if I start writing House of Leaves, you know, my agent's going to laugh me right out of the, you know, out of the thing. But if I'm writing a short story for a market that I know will be receptive to that sort of thing, I can play with typography, I can play with point of view, and really stretch as a writer and try something new.
Every single time. for me.
About typography,
Yeah.
when you do weird typography, we hate it. I mean, in an anthology, because it invariably gets screwed up, and we have
Well,
to go through it
that's-
100 times, and then it might still get screwed up at the end.
Oh, yeah.
result.
That's why I say if I know they're receptive to it. But yeah.
I mean, I'm receptive to it, but it's like, oh no, I'm not looking it over. Someone else is proofreading that.
That's why I do it. Well, in the Echoes anthology, just even the fact that my title had a cross out in it became an issue for like
Yes,
at the top of the page. Yeah.
yeah. They thought it was a mistake. I said, no, that's how it's supposed to be. Someone else was.
Write your second person story if it needs to be there. I mean, that's the thing. Like, it has to be part and parcel as to why the story has to be written.
Yeah.
I mean, I get like fun ideas all the time about like, oh, this would be a cool narrative thing, but like, I'm not just going to do it unless I have a story
Anthropomorphic
that goes
animals in
with it.
verse.
Yeah. Or like, I wrote a short story called Notes from the Dog Walkers, and it's a story that's told through notes left by dog walkers. Because we had a dog walker. In like 2017, our kids were older, we needed someone to come by the house a couple days a week. And they left these really funny notes. Like, you know, Holly did great today, went for a walk, belly rubs, pee, check, poo, check. I was like, oh, I gotta write a story using these. But like, it took me 2 years to figure out like why, like what story would need that sort of narrative thing.
Yeah.
And that was a story that was only in my collection. Like, I didn't try selling that to anybody else.
I think short stories are, they're a place to push yourself. Really, when I write a short story, I feel like I'm a mad scientist. I've got the robe and everything, and I'm just mixing crazy stuff from beaker to beaker and seeing if it's going to explode, you know? And sometimes it explodes, and sometimes it makes a different color, and I'm kind of happy.
Yeah. You know, it's funny you say that Notes from the Dog Walker took you 2 years to figure out how to tell that story. I have a story called This Last Little Piece of Darkness that I worked on for 18 years because I could not figure out how to tell the story. Like, off and on, if I ever had a moment, I would tinker with it and I would try it. And everything I did with it was wrong because I kept trying to shoehorn it into a place where it felt like artificially creative. Like, oh, what if it was a crime story? Oh, what if it was a vampire story? And then I realized, no, it's just a letter from one person to another. And yeah, but it took me almost 2 decades to figure out that I had no idea what the hell I was doing.
Yeah. I often say I hate experimental fiction, and I always have to add the caveat that if I notice it, because I mean, I've read things, I remember reading J.R. by Gaddis, and I hated it because I think every sentence has a dash or something. It was like, are you kidding me? But then I've read other things that I didn't realize till after the fact were experimental or unusual in their structure or something in the telling. There was a Michael Bishop story years ago I took for Omni that was, it was told in the first person future. You are going to do this. Wow. And I didn't realize it until I read the story and loved it. And if I had noticed it before, I would have said, are you kidding me? It was like,
That's amazing. Yeah, second person future tense would. What's the name of that story?
life considered as a many-colored cat. Wait, it's about cats and it's dark and it's. I think cats considered as something of many. No, life considered as a configuration of many something lustrous cats. I mean, it's a long title, but you can probably look it up. I don't know if you can find it anyplace. It must be in one of his collections.
Oh wow, yeah, no, I have to.
But it was really interesting and well done.
You do know one of us is going to do, first-person future tense now, right?
What?
One of us is going to do first person future tense and send it to you just because you said that.
Well, if I don't notice, it'll be great. Oh.
You're right. When you don't notice the innovation until you're done with the piece, that's a certain sort of
That's a
magic.
success.
Yeah. Like
Yeah.
I read in, 99, Tristan Egoff's Lord of the Barnyard. I didn't realize till I got to the end of that 400-page novel that it had not a single line of dialogue, and
Wow.
it blew me away.
And Sharp Teeth, I think, by Toby Barlow, is like a poem.
Yeah.
You don't I didn't realize it, until I read reviews. I said, oh my God, it is, but it's terrific.
You know, one of my very favorite short story forms to write are lists. I love stories as lists, list as stories, and I've done a lot of them, but I had to stop doing them for a while because I realized I was forgetting how to do transitions. Because with a list story, the transition is that was 1, this is 2, this is 3. But so I was afraid that my muscles are atrophying, and I needed to go back and learn.
Something that occurred to me is that you were talking a bit about how a novel is very complex. Ellen, you mentioned a lot of different threads in a novel. Short stories are more succinct, they're more focused. I was wondering, as you are writing short stories, have you felt that you realize that there is an element of fiction that you are returning to? Is it theme? Is it atmosphere? Is it a portrait of a certain character? Is it a place or a time? Is there something that could be a unifying presence in your short fiction? And if so, did that evolve organically, or is it something that you feel you like to explore through short fiction?
And is it different from novels?
I feel like every writer basically has one story to tell, maybe 2 if they're lucky, and what they do every time out is they smuggle that story into their mom's closet and dress it up in different clothes and truck it out and say, look, this is all new. You don't recognize us, but we can tell, and I can tell in my own stuff. I tell father-son stories over and over and over, and I'm like, what's up with that? I don't have any idea, but it just keeps happening, whether I want it to or not.
Yeah. If there's a thematic consistency in my work, it's grief. And I just kind of rework grief over and over again. And even Paul and I both kind of refer to what we do as bummer fiction. But
Yeah, my editor calls me sad horror, Mr. Sad. Yeah, I don't know. Sometimes I try not to think about it too much, but also with the same idea, I think the only writing advice that's worth anything is basically what Stephen just said, is lean into your obsessions. It's not the same as write what you know. That's different. That's bad advice. But lean into your obsessions that stuff's going to be in there anyway. You might as well just lean in.
Salman Rushdie says, write what you know as long as what you know is interesting.
It's always been feminine rage for me. I'm a queer person of color from a developing nation living in America. It's hard not to be constantly angry at I see a lot of people nodding right now. And I think I go back to it over and over again, because especially if you come from an immigrant family, there are generations of trauma haunting you. You are aware that there are women from years before ancestors who have given their lives to the idea of a better future, knowing that they will never be able to have any of it. And you carry that pain, and you carry as well the horror of it, because when you surrender all of yourself to someone else, it's hard for it to not break you. And I think my stories often look back at that, try and figure out if there is a way to solve those ghosts.
It's funny because write what you know, I think, speaks exactly to what you just said, which is write what you know is terrible advice if what you think you know is facts. Right? Write what you know is great advice if what you understand that to be is write what you know to be authentically, emotionally true. Mm-hmm. So you can write about spaceships, and it can be this incredibly wrenching novel about families and separation and reunification, all of that, and it just happens to take place on a spaceship, which you know nothing about. But what you know is the emotional center of the story.
I love short stories, but I do find that more often than not, they are upsetting, disturbing, unsettling, in a good way, but certainly that. And I'm not sure if I'm just not finding the happy short stories, but I was wondering if you think there is something about the medium of short story that lends itself to making readers feel that way and to wanting to write in that way.
I assume you're talking about horror short stories?
Just in general, just fiction short stories, a lot of times I just end up feeling like that was profound, that was unsettling. There's always something unsettling about it.
I'm going to jump into that first. I think a lot of short stories tend to come from a moment in time where people have a very specific emotion, very specific issue that they're trying to grapple with. And because it is a short story, you cannot keep layering a lot of things. I mean, some people do it and they're very good at it, so caveat there. Because you cannot layer too many things there that core emotion stays, and I think that's what makes it so upsetting sometimes for short stories. I also just write really grim stuff, so I don't know.
Well, I mean, the thing is with horror, that's the intention. So that's a good thing, but I can see the problem. I don't read that many mainstream short stories, but yeah, they're probably based around some crisis in some person's life. Otherwise, it wouldn't, what's the story?
Right, right. Yeah, no, I read a lot of literary short stories, and yeah, they all kind of explore darker themes because these people are it seems to be a trope in literary to be exploring your darkness and the way the world acts upon you as opposed to, exploring joy. So I'm no help. Like, the only name I can think of is David Sedaris, but that's not fiction, that's memoir.
Well, I mean, I don't know if, like, Kelly Link, I think, is someone who's not necessarily, like, I can't say I feel, like, bummed out after, I mean, some of her stories, but I don't know, there's sort of, like, a joy of just imagination to her shorter work.
Yeah,
Yes,
kind of a
more-
But sometimes she writes horror
Yeah.
and sometimes
No,
she
but she
writes
does, yeah.
mainstream. And I think some of her stories are not meant to be horror, and because of
Right.
that, they do have a different tone.
I would say Amy Bender, like to me, it was one of my favorite, it still is, short story collections that really, like, I read that as a young writer, that really blew my mind. The Girl in the Flammable Skirt. I mean, some of it, veers towards sort of dark themes, but it also is just, like, really smart and fun and imaginative and clever.
It's funny. I think the story that Neil read last night about the djinn was exactly what you were looking for, which was a really wonderful story
Joyous.
about finding satisfaction in simplicity. It was a beautiful story that didn't go dark.
I think
Rake my leaves. That's what I want.
Leaves.
I think, like, the best comedians, to me, are the comedians who are pissed off at the world. They're not on stage to make you laugh. They're on stage to vent their frustrations and wrap it up in a joke so that maybe you agree with them a little bit. And in the same way, I think writers come to stories not because they think the world is perfect and they want to represent its perfection on the page. They come because they're frustrated, they're pissed off. And so the stories that they produce do have dark undercurrents, and they're trying to expose the underbelly of existence, stuff like that.
Yeah, we're all bummers. Sorry.
Just want to jump in to say, if you're looking for something that still has a slightly melancholy air and has its roots, I think, in the darkest stuff, but it's beautiful and kind of hopeful. Oh my God, this smiles will not stay. Sorry about that. May I recommend Dark Breakers by C.S. Cooney? It is a gorgeous collection, and it has, I think, my favorite short story in the world, Longer Green, where an old woman goes back to the places that she visited with her husband when he lived. And it talks about the idea of a good death, about 60 years with someone you love more than anything else in the world, and how you give them up, but also the kind of love and the kind of comfort you carry from having 60 years, even through that grief. So that one, if you're looking for something slightly more cheerful.
And kind of in keeping with that, I think to a lot of us, the darkness is comforting, So we'll write a story and we are comforted by it, but it might be disturbing too.
A lot of the time for me, it's an unencumbrance. I'm giving up weight that I carry by putting it in a story and let the book hold it for me.
I was thinking, when I was editing Omni, no one knew what I wanted for fiction, except they knew that most of what I published was depressing. It's no good. Downbeat.
I cut my teeth on your Omni stories in the 80s. Like, that's where my taste in fiction comes from, is from reading all those Omnis religiously every month.
I had a subscription too, yeah. Ellen, you mentioned working with authors and giving feedback on their stories and asking for changes. So I was curious how often you had to, without naming any names, how often do you have to do that, and does it work? And for the authors, have you done that with an editor? And did you find the story came out better, or was it different from what you intended? How has that author-editor relationship worked on short stories for you guys?
Well, I work on, I think, I've hardly read any stories that I've bought that are perfect, or that I consider perfect. I mean, I think maybe 1 or 2 stories in my entire career that needed no editing whatsoever. But generally, if I know that I like a story enough to buy it for something, I will work with the author on it. And depending on how much work I think the story needs, I won't commit to buying the story until I'm sure that the author and I will be able to fix it. or whatever. If not fix it, make it better. But I hope that any of my editing makes the story, helps the author make the story better. I'll never rewrite anyone. My process is to ask questions or suggestions. If I don't understand, I don't remember if I've done this with any of you, but if I don't understand what's actually, I think with you probably, Stephen, if I don't understand what's actually going on, I'll say, what do you see is happening on this page? I mean, what is going on? What's happening here? And they'll say, blah, 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 blah. I said, well, it's not on the page. Could you please put it there? So, I mean, usually it's pretty genial. I mean, if I hated working with someone, I wouldn't work with them again. Yeah.
Except for John Langan. I'm just kidding.
I love working with, well, I can't edit him enough because he's always late.
But also, you don't sugarcoat it, which I appreciate, you know? I hate it when an editor is all, they say like 90% nice and then the mean thing. I don't know.
I just didn't mean thing right away.
Yeah, no, it's congenial but direct.
Yeah. Well, I try not to be mean. With writers who I work with a lot, I am more blunt, I guess, because I figure they understand, well, if I wasn't working, if I didn't like the story, I wouldn't be working on it. However, occasionally, one writer who I worked with for many years, who, as she aged, she got a little more grumpy. And there was a story that I had questions or I wanted her to work on, and she like blew up at me. She's like, why do you want me to do this? You hate the story, you hate everything I buy. It's like, I've been buying your stories for like 20 years. So I don't hate your stories, I like the story, just fix it, you know? So, but I think that was part of her aging. But, you know, I mean, I love working with the writers, and my job, at least a good part of it, is to get the writer to express what they want to express on the page. And sometimes I have gone through like 4 rewrites. I give an example, Kelly Robeson's A Human Stain, which is a novelette that is pretty weird and grisly. And we went through 2 revisions, and then something came up and I asked a question, and she gave me this answer that had nothing to do with anything on the page at all. I said, what? I said, that's what's going on? It's like, she said, yeah, and it's like, not, in your head is not good enough. You have to give the audience, the readers, more than that. You have to, you just have to put more on the page. And even so, the eventual story, there are still things that are many questions I have about what was going on and certain things, but it was good enough to win a Nebula Award. And it was a really great story, but I was never totally satisfied that she didn't give me enough information. I said, what the hell's going on here?
I mean, from a writer's perspective, that happens a lot, because you're writing a thing and you think, and you know the story, it's in your head.
Right.
And if you're like me, you plotted it out, and then you tell the story and you realize that at some point an editor will point out, that thing that was in your head didn't make it to the page, and it's not in anybody else's head but yours.
Right, you forgot.
So you need to put it in their head.
Yeah. And Ellen, this may be talking out of school, so decline to answer, of course, but you published Terry Bisson's They're Made Out of Meat way back when. Did that take a lot of editing, or did it come in perfect?
I think it probably came in perfect. I don't remember, but it was only like 500 words.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure, it came in pretty perfect. But the one I was thinking of was a Kelly Eskridge story that she wrote for an anthology. And the only change was we changed the title. I mean, the story was, And Salome Danced, and I don't remember the original title. Oh, it was really boring, whatever it was. But that's the only change. And I don't know why it was so clean. I mean, it may have gotten a copy edit, I don't even remember, but it was like, it was amazing. But none ever come in like that.
Sorry, I've been trying like for a minute. I think edits are fairly easy for me because I've always been lucky to work with editors I do like. If you have that trust, you know they're not asking for those changes because they don't like your work. They like your work, but they're trying to make it perfect. It's the idea. It's like finding a diamond, I guess, or a precious stone. As it is, fine. But the editor's job is to polish it until it gleams. So knowing that and holding it in your heart makes it easy to deal with everything. Although there was that one edit letter you sent to me where you literally opened with, do not panic. I do actually like this.
Yeah, when I'd have quote unquote heavier edits, or I wouldn't say criticisms, whatever, questions.
It was 18 pages, Ellen, for a 100-page book.
Right, well, that's different. But yeah, I try to be gentle when I can. I was going to say something, I totally forgot what it was.
I love that you use the word trust, because there is a huge relationship of trust between editors and writers, in that you know it's a fine line as the delicate instruments of art. right? To not feel wounded by suggestions or criticisms or whatever. And my experience has been almost universally, with exceptions, very notable exceptions, that suggestions I get from editors always make my work better.
Yeah.
I'm going to jump in because we do have other panels coming up. And I know we can all sit here and listen to you for days, but we do have the rest of StoryFest to go through. So thank you all for your time. And audience members, we have copies of all of their books in the Kamansky room for sale, and the authors will be signing at our signing table right back here. So please purchase a book, get it signed, and come back for the next panel. Thank you.